Hey guys, this is miicrow here. It's been a bit since I did a video, and I wanted to kind of update people on Relentless, my current thoughts on this, which some people care about, some people don't. The people that don't care about it, there's a good amount of tank beef with it, so it's kind of fun. But people that do care about it, this is, in my opinion, this is the best artifact or best designed artifact in the game, and it's super interesting to try to make it work. Uh, on top of that, I wanted to talk about some of the season 9 Q&A, dev Q&A talks, and then kind of wanted to end up on what I expect the meta to be in New World League, assuming people don't crash out and assuming that we make it to season 9, which in my opinion is going to have the biggest meta shift since VG Oblivion was stripping sacreds. Like, this will be the biggest meta shift in the last 2 to 3 years, in my opinion, and kind of wanted to go through why with that. Uh, but I actually planned an agenda for once, so I might be a little bit more cohesive, and let's kind of start getting into it. So last video, or a video I put out, which was cut out from Twitch, I talked about Relentless. I talked about how I was the only person that could make it work properly, and kind of left it at that. And I think the general feedback of that was a bit of like it was definitely a take, and there was a bit of feedback of Meeker, what the fuck are you saying, basically? And then there was a little bit of feedback on, well, mostly that, but a little bit of other people like kind of understood what I was kind of going for and the underlying reasons. But it was mostly taken as the Meeker, what the fuck are you saying kind of thing. So I kind of wanted to explain that better. And in order to explain that, I need to explain the styles of Relentless that people have been playing. Last time I talked about the different styles of tank. Relentless is kind of its own beast. It's not like you're playing tank. It's not like you're playing flail. It's not like you're playing IGVG, but a lot of people like to think it's like you're playing IGVG, and people tend to play it a few different ways. The three things I mostly see with it is I see Relentless with IG. IG is really good in the sense that with Relentless active, you have this negative armor consequence. What IG allows you to do is I switch to my IG, and this negative consequence is basically removed. You do give up your aura, but in return for that, you become increasingly survivable. So this basically allows you to flip aggro in certain situations. So it's like, say you want to keep teammates alive and you're in a healthy spot. Okay, I have Relentless out. Say you want to keep yourself alive. Okay, I have IG out. Say you kind of want to do a bit of both, then you have to do a bit of both and kind of juggle it. So that's what that allows you to do. This is by far the most popular style, but the mistake I continually see with it is people play with the Relentless out like really passively when you should be playing aggro with the Relentless out, in my opinion, and switching to IG basically only for crashes. You, with as Relentless, have effectively as much, if not more, effective HP if you're consistently healed, which is, I would argue, a flaw with how Relentless is currently being slotted. And also, before I get into much detail with this, I wanted to shout out Kenneth and Dalevar. The stuff I'm about to say may not be their opinion, but it's my opinion after talking to them for probably 8 hours each in the last like 3 to 4 days on just theory crafting stuff alone. And most people that care to that detail about this stuff no longer play the game. So shout out for them because they clearly care, clearly are trying to optimize and aren't afraid of a challenge when it comes to this. Unlike some people, like I heard in EU, people aren't even attempting to play Relentless right now. And if you are EU and disagree with that, please let me know, because that is what I've heard. And most of the people I know that played in EU have quit the game, for lack of a better term. So I'm kind of curious what the meta is over there. But from my experience, EU players tend to put a little bit more aggro onto and punish tanks a little bit more on point. It is harder to play on point in EU compared to NA, and that's mostly because they are better at dogging and are better at knowing when they can get away with it. Versus NA right now, I would say the quality of players has pretty much gotten just worse, to the point where I am restructuring and redoing my gear to optimize for people playing worse, and it's kind of frustrating to see, and is just overall just kind of feels stupid. But I might get to this video, I might get into a later video, but I can kind of explain why on some of that. So what I wanted to, I kind of went off on a tangent, but the main thing I want to talk about from that first point is Flail IG is pretty common, SNS IG is pretty common. Both those have the same idea. People crash on you, you take the IG out. The downside of that is the Relentless isn't active when people crash. Generally, the idea is with this style, if people crash on you, don't try to help them, because you're going to probably die trying to help them, and you trying to help them isn't going to save them anyway. They're most likely going to die if they don't double dodge into getting out, or if they don't triple dodge. Like, if they don't have good stand management, they're just dead. And I generally agree with that, assuming that people are good at the game. I do not think this assumption is valid anymore, so I slightly disagree on that whole style, but I do agree that that style is accurate if people are good at the game in the current meta. That being said, I expect the meta to shift, and I'll go into that later in this. So one style being this IG, the next style that is the kind that I play, and the reason why I say pretty confidently that I'm the best Relentless player currently in the game is because I play SNS with Flail and average 3 deaths in a war in the T1 wars. So that was like Prim versus COI. So I was averaging 3 deaths per war at the end in those wars in a quad melee group. This is very different than the people that immediately after they saw Kenneth play one war with this, and they were like, what the fuck is miicrow talking about? Kenneth only had 1 death. And they didn't look at it as VOD. That is very, very, very different than that style. So SNS, like Kenneth with that 1 death VOD, he did have SNS Flail, but the group style is completely different, and you can't compare the two. It is very different to play in a T2 to T3 war with a double healer, musket, and bruiser group. So there are 2 people and 2 healers in the group. The musket effectively did not need heals at all if you actually watch the VOD. And Kenneth actually played decently in that VOD, but if you actually watch it back, he had 1 death, but it very, very easily could have been a 5 to 7 death war. And I have screenshots of him at times. Just keep in mind, tank players is what Kenneth is playing. He has about 28k HP. There were multiple times in that VOD where he had sub 500k HP, and it got bailed out by a 17k DE from a healer. And that wasn't with dodging. That was nothing left in the tank, barely got bailed out with like the best comp possible. And that changed my perspective, because what I learned from that is this class is infinitely easier to play and infinitely easier to get more value with if it's slotted in group 1. Because in group 1, you have 1 less person to heal, and generally speaking, the person that's not Relentless is going to have an easier time anyway. So when you're comparing normal tank to a tank with Relentless, so the build I'm playing, for instance, and the build that Kenneth is playing, this is why that build is so much harder. If you are a normal tank without Relentless right now, and there's a Relentless on your team that is within aura range of you, you have 80% more armor than anyone else. This is why I have struggled to say that tank should be the one with Relentless, because 80% armor is just insurmountable. It is such a big number that it is like hard to fathom it being good on the class that is most likely to take the most damage during a crash. So that's why I pushed for it to generally be slotted on the Flail or the second tank slot. There is another way of like, but the problem with, so you could put it on tank, right? You put it on tank, the tank effectively cannot hold shield, or they can't be as involved in crashes. You saw that with like the last war that Kenneth had, where he had some mistakes and there were some other mistakes within the group itself, but I think it was like a 5 or so death war. Like, it is possible to play it as the tank slot. It is, I think it's actually like, in theory, better to play it as a tank slot right now. It's just like the practicality of it is, it might be too hard for anyone to actually play well in the current game. And if you lose that player that's on Relentless in the tank slot, you basically just auto lose any fight that happens after that. So, like there's a Prim war. I could probably pull up this war. We could just throw it on in the background just to have it. Is this the right one? Yeah, this is the right one. So I could throw this war on in the background just so we can have some context. But let me turn the volume down because it's going to get distracting. But in this war, I played Relentless and Kenneth played Relentless because we're both trying to get a Relentless VOD and we're both trying to limit test our classes and like get better at the game. And there are times where it was like if I didn't have Relentless or if we didn't have a second tank, like if I was not on Relentless, I think we would have just auto lost. And that's like eventually we won versus 15k, but it was not a pretty win. And then from my understanding, 15k was down roughly 30 people from their starter squad. So in my opinion, this is a better showing than 50k than it was like a good showing from Prim. But that aside, Relentless works better if it's slotted in the group 1 slot because there's less people that have to be healed. The Relentless, the way the class fundamentally works, right, is if you look at the shield, I am trading off armor for increasing incoming heals, so I need to be healed more. So it makes sense to, like, if the Relentless is playing generally stationary, to have the Sacred near the Relentless. This Relentless is always playing on Sacreds. AoE stuff should generally be going through the Relentless so that the Relentless player could, have high uptime with the Tower Shield out. If they need to switch, they could switch using IG, or they could play like that Fortify stacking build I was talking about earlier, where you have like SNS with Flail. You generally use Barrage as a get out card or get out of jail free card. Use Barrage as Stone Form, and you can just dip from any clump in the game. You're generally chilling at that point. So those are the two major styles. And then like the third one that I've kind of been like kind of talking about here with a little bit with the group 1 is like the heal pumping aspect, where if you're pumping the heck out of the Relentless, it's a lot easier to play for obvious reasons. And that's just generally how the class is balanced. So generally, AoE heals should be aimed at the Relentless player. And then there's some other things to go into this like kind of heal pumping style that I'll show with build optimization in a bit. But in terms of Relentless in general, it feels like Kenneth and I'm being completely like, I don't know other people that are actively like trying to push this class, so I could totally be wrong about this. But from an NA perspective and from what I've heard from EU, it feels like Kenneth and I are really the only two people trying to push the limits with this class. And the concerns I have about that is there's 3 slots in a point team generally for support players right now. That one of those is generally reserved for an IGL. If the IGL can't play in that slot, a lot of the stuff gets a lot easier. If the IGL has to play in that slot, you kind of run into a debacle really, really quickly. So normal Flail, like your inherent job is basically to control space, and by controlling space, you can allow your team to get passive tick. And the way that you do that is you just force keep members off the point, and then you are a class that inherently is a threat because generally that normal Flail runs trip. And that trip threat alone can just force people to have to play in a more conservative manner that forces them off the point. You generally can't force top point really easily when you're on Relentless. I have done it, but it's really, really hard as well. So in this VOD here, I think you'll see me start to do it, but I don't do it all the time here either because this is a triple setup, right? Like we have Dale, we have me, we have Kenneth. So it's kind of OP in the sense that I have Relentless, Kenneth has Relentless, so it's like I'm playing a little bit more conservative. I don't want to be on top of Kenneth, which is why you see me like off of Kenneth, generally not near the top of point. And then Dale is pretty much all the time here at the top of point because he's the one that can kind of force space better. So I'm playing like kind of off angles a little bit more, trying to control the outside, and then looking for wraps when the timing is needed. So this is like not something that you'll generally see in the New World League though, because the IGL is taking up one of those slots. So you have to basically sacrifice one of the roles. You could sacrifice the Flail and you concede the point stepping ability, which then allows spear players to generally get more value on point, like spear hatchet. And that would be the argument against the Flail doing it, because if the Flail can't really contest the spears from stepping point, they're going to pressure other people on the point, and you're generally not going to have a good time unless bruisers could also get those players off the point. But bruisers, generally speaking, nowadays, I'd say are less good at the game and haven't been able to do that consistently. Like you don't see bruisers Warhammer out at the top of the point, forcing healers off. So like take this spot an example. So what's 15K's 15K has double tank, like effectively. So they're running that kind of fortify stacking style I'm talking about. On this side split, that our healers are able to step for free, That being said, they're not all stepping for free because I would argue the healers aren't as good as the game as it used to be. But the healers 100% in this situation should be stepping bot right point for free. It's literally free, literally uncontested. You see people like Curio and Brick stepping to point. This is part of the reason why they're considered to be the best healers in the game. Like Curio and Brick are considered to probably be top 5 right now in the game, and this is like one of those things that separates them. But the healers control the tick in this situation, and Flail kind of helps mitigate that and can force people back. Instead of that, what is happening now is you have basically double tank going on for most comps, and then you have other people like Spear Hatchets trying to force people off. You have Void Blades forcing people off, and that's just generally less effective and is a little bit less scary than something like this where you go for a trip. Now I've got 420, the whatever, like the Spear player, like he's super low. He has to get off a point, so he literally had to back out because there's a shower behind him. I trip him. He's 1 HP. He had to use his movement to get out. He's not going to be able to come back in for at least another 5-10 seconds. So we have time to like do whatever we want in this circumstance. And that's like the reason why Dale would argue, and I would tend to agree, that it's really hard to justify the Flail on Relentless and why it's really hard to play it and do well. What I was seeing from a lot of other Flail VODs is basically like where I'm positioned right now. Like this is generally really passive. That's because they went for a crash and we just got the side point. This is like the spot that I've seen like Flails like play pretty often. It's like really far back. It's not engaged at all. You aren't really controlling space. Like you saw me earlier, like pushing this top left and actually actively getting value there. And based off the tempo, I knew that I was not going to get crashed on and instantly get blown up. That's the kind of thing I haven't really seen Flails do. And that's the part that kind of separates, I would argue, the good Flails from the bad Flails. So what else I want to talk about here? I've talked about this war a bit. I've talked about how Kenneth is trying to make it work on tank, how I'm trying to make it work on Flail. I would like to try to make it work on tank, but I don't think there's a lot of servers where I can do that consistently. So this is like where you see the Flail IG idea, right? I switched to IG, I instantly get way tankier. I guess this is probably a good time to go to the build. So this is how I've built this Flail class is basically I become ultra tanky when I switch to IG, and I just want to explain how that happens. So you could see right here, like I'm getting out on the IG, right? I broke my tomb. You see 2 fortify buffs. There's actually a 3rd fortify buff here, but I need to explain that one a little bit more in detail. So when I'm on Relentless, you could effectively think it as minus 25% fortify. When I switch to IG, I'm on effectively 0% fortify. When I use Tomb, that triggers the passive Defiant Freeze, which gives me a 20% fortify for 2 seconds. When I break the Tomb, that activates Cleansing Tomb as well as Strengthened Tomb, which gives me another 25% fortify for 3 seconds, right? So this effectively 20% plus 25%, there's a minus 25% in there. So what's like our net difference? The net difference is 70% armor. There is a additional little bit on top of that given some conditions. So if you are on Flail and you have completely BIS'd out gear, you are 725, you opened up your wallet and you said AGS take my money, you can get to 300 focus. If you get to 300 focus, you get 20% fortify for 10 seconds when healing allies while your mana is at or below 50%. I'm not 100% sure if you yourself are an ally. This is probably something I should test before going into this. But one tech to try to get this to trigger more consistently is to put Mortal Lifesteal on a piece, because that will trigger as a heal, which then could proc the Fortify. Mortal Lifesteal also has a different thing where because this is a heal, this triggers Healing Breeze, which is a heal over time, and because I have Relentless, that gets boosted. This heal over time passive is only active during combat, and I need to double check if this is active when I have Relentless out or not. But in any case, while you have the Relentless active, at least, you will get the heal boost, so there's inherent synergy there. If you run Onk, there's another synergy there. If you have 50 focus, there's another synergy there. Basically, heal over times are your best friend with this class, so Healing Breeze generally makes sense. Stuff like Healing Tomb generally makes sense. And just, in general, ways to trigger heals make a lot of sense with the Flail IG class. The way that I've built it is I'm doing some elemental aversion to the point where I'm not super scared during a crash that I'll die when I have IG out, so I think I'm 3 elemental aversion. And then I have 3 enchanted wards, so if people start dogging me, I'm not just getting nuked from orbit by random attacks. I have 4 invigorated, which if you run a kite shield with 4 invigorated on Flail and you have Desert Sunrise active, Kind of a funny thing, but you end up with 99% disease duration reduction, which effectively means I'm just immune to disease because no one runs infected on ring anymore. So that's kind of a fun trick. But even without that, I think I'm at like 89% disease duration reduction. What that means is that when I get healed, I'm getting healed for a lot. So it inherently caters itself to the issue that I struggle with this class, which is just if you get healed, you'll generally get value. If you have Rens on you, if you have exhaust or like any of these other effects, you will die. So I prefer Invig. Some people prefer health. Health is generally better if you're trying to take damage and live through it. And it's generally burst damage. Invig is better over time. I think it's generally like the reason why I've always liked Invig is Invig puts yourself in a position where you don't die during bullshit scenarios and you die during scenarios that you can control. So during a crash, I can control where I'm positioned so that I don't die as often during that crash. But outside of a crash, if I'm getting dogged, sometimes you can't control it as much. Like if Sam versus a spear hatchet player, that player is going to try to stack a bunch of rend on me and just nuke me from orbit. This effectively can counter that style. So that's something that's felt good. Vital Synergy generally feels good, but there's some weird interactions that will be fixed soon, so it's probably not worth getting into, but generally speaking, a good perk, definitely a good perk if you're running Relentless. Doing max refreshing, because that's good. Everything else here is pretty standard. So in terms of on this, right now I have Strike Shield Ward for Relentless. Why do I have Strike Shield Ward over Slash Shield Ward? The reason why in the past we would run Slash Shield Ward on the shield and we put Strike on the amulet is because bruisers generally hit the player with the tower shield with the Warhammer weapon. And when they hit the person with the Warhammer weapon and they break the shield, they generally have their Warhammer out. So the majority of the burst damage that's incoming after your shield gets broken is from the Warhammer. From the wars I've played in the last month, including T1 wars, the bruisers aren't hitting with the Warhammer anymore for some stupid reason. So now I'm comfortable just putting on the slash protection on Ankh. This might depending on the meta. So like, who did I play with versus last night? So I was doing OPR, not yesterday, the day before yesterday. I think it was versus NATO. NATO was a very, very good bruiser and supple back in the day. NATO still dogs people with the Warhammer. NATO hurt me a lot in that OPR. But versus every other player that I've been versus, when they were trying to kill me, I looked at VODs and they always have the Great Axe out. So like depending on the meta, you could switch this. So if this switches back in New World League, I just switch this again. It's like not that big of a deal. So that's something that's interesting there. And I basically have had to adapt because bruisers got worse at the game. So like I don't know. It's just weird. That's just the meta right now. Like if they switched back or if there was something in the middle, maybe I would do like thrust shield ward on here or something stupid like that, and then I would put on conditioning for slash or conditioning for strike. Like there's different ways to spin it, but I switched that because of that reason. And then lastly, the last tech I used that makes my life a lot easier that I noticed a lot of flails not doing is they use the wrong kind of stone form. There's like the healing over time stone form. I've talked about how health stuff is generally good for this build. The heal does heal for a lot, like it's 1.1k, but keep in mind that most of the time with this class you're dying during burst windows because of this debuff. And if you want to live with this debuff, you could just armor stack your way out of it, which is the other style I talked about that I play that other people generally don't play. You don't have to do that with the IG. You can do that with the Flail because the Flail has access to a bunch of good fortifies. So if you're like Flail SNS, you could use fortify stacking between the two weapons to get to a pretty healthy spot. You don't really have to worry about this. But the fortify on here will generally help you survive burst. So that's how I've kind of spun this. It's a little bit different. The trees are pretty standard. This one I've been experimenting with a bit between bash. Upheaval is definitely good enough to run. Resolve is definitely good enough to run. I think everyone runs a combination of these. Upheaval is just you have your other abilities up more. A Whirling Blade is a weaken, which is why people tend to run it. Bash is a good way to get stamina back. It's also a good way to cancel people out of Maelstrom combos, so that's why I prefer that right now as a tank. Resolve is particularly good right now as well because Void Gauntlets got significantly worse at the game. Like, significantly worse. To the point where I'm not really afraid of them as much anymore, and to the point where I've noticed that they are not stripping my resolve at all. This is something that people used to watch hawkishly, and it's just like not being done anymore, and it's just kind of crazy that it's come that far. But some other things there as well. So that's generally the style. This might change a bit depending on the meta with the new season. I also wanted to talk about the dev Q&A and some Heartroom stuff, and maybe I'll throw this other VOD I have that I didn't post yet up on YouTube tonight or something like that, or up on YouTube before the new World League at least, so that people can kind of see what I'm talking about with playing more aggro with the Flail IG style. But there is a dev Q&A. Shout out to Crush because he put an announcement in my Discord that links to it. But if you go here, you can see all the responses. This stuff is generally about Season 9. Season 9 is slated to come out in roughly a month. And Season 9 will change the meta. And the devs kind of go to that extent in a bit. So they talk about some rewards in here. I don't think this part is as interesting to us right now. But like there's a thing here, will we get a new raid in 2025? Stay tuned. So what this basically means is yes, we're getting a new raid. The next season is going to be during the fall. There's not going to be a lot of time after that. I think it doesn't confirm we're getting a new raid in Season 9, but it at least gives the impression that we're getting it in Season 9 or Season 10. And whenever that new raid drops, I think we're going to get the leaked Heart Rune. If you guys haven't seen the leaked Heart Rune, there are videos of it. I could at least show what it does and explain why it will change the meta. So if you go to database, you go to items, where would it be under here? I'm not going to lie, it's been a bit. Heart Runes. There we go. If you keep scrolling down, we should see it because it has been data mined, and there we go. It is the Cunning Heart Rune of Phantom Blades. This Heart Rune has a variant. So keep in mind, this is a 4-meter AoE. What a 4-meter AoE looks like is... Let me just throw this weapon on. This is a 4-meter AoE. So this is how big this effect is. If this effect hits you, you are dealt damage, which honestly doesn't matter here. And more importantly, you are afflicted with Sluggish. What Sluggish does is it prevents the target from dodging for 2 seconds or until they hit a target. So what this will mean is during a crash or anytime you're trying to get someone low, they effectively have to use an ability to get out. They can't easily dodge. And what that does is it heavily nerfs the IG style. So if you have IG out, your general idea is you're going to go dodge into IG into Tomb Break. If you run an extra stam Rune Glass, you can get extra stam off of that. It's not a bad tech at all. And then you can do either a dodge or a single dodge depending on how long you wait or if you run the stam tech. So it is a dodge-based way to live crashes. This effectively is going to add one aspect to it where you need to be hitting a target to be able to dodge again. If you have IG when you break your tomb, you're generally going to be okay. But say someone hits you with this effect after your tomb breaks, you're completely fucked and you're just dead. So I expect that people will be dying more to crashes because of this new Heart Rune, people will likely have to adopt a different style of SNS. We've talked about the different styles of SNSs before. The generally one that is not preferred, that I would argue is underrated right now, is the SNS that just sits there, holds right click the entire time, has a flail, boosts their armor by 80% because the flail is running Relentless, and you just tank stuff, and you help people live. If the class helps people survive crashes and it doesn't die, that's generally why SNS gets value. That style I expect to be better when this Heart Rune comes out, and it seems like it would make sense for this Heart Rune to be tied to the raid. I don't really know this, but like, you figure you have a Heart Rune. What do we have Heart Runes now for? We have it for raids and we have it for expeditions. So it's going to be tied to one of them. We just got confirmed that there's going to be a new raid at some point in 2025. So whenever this raid comes out, I expect this new Heart Rune to be tied with it that we've already seen leaked. And that will change the meta. There's also things where they're talking about how in this dev Q&A, how they're looking to change the meta in other ways. This is PvP track. This is not the one I'm looking for. Season 9 will have another nerf to Void Blade in it, and Season 10 will have a lot of power changes across the board that will completely mix up the meta. So, Season 9, it sounds like it could be Season 9 or Season 10. I don't know if it will be Season 10 or Season 9 when this stuff comes out. But New World League very easily is extending into Season 9. I think is debatably extending into Season 10, depending on how long that season lasts. And how well New World League does. So expect like a meta change at some point. Season 9 is more focused on just balance updates as well as a few more artifacts with a rework of 3 lesser used artifacts to mix up the meta a bit. However, not for Season 9, but for an upcoming season, we are planning a massive overhaul of the entire perk system, which will greatly mix up the meta. Okay, so that's more likely to be Season 10 where we see the entire meta being shifted. Will that be so does that mean the raid will be alongside Season 10 then? Because that's like seems like the one that's going to be the one that mixes up the meta. I don't think it really confirms it, but it's suggested that the raid will be in Season 9 or Season 10. So that's kind of interesting. Also in this Q&A, they talk about haste creep. This has been like pretty prevalent in OPR to the point where you can't really catch people anymore. I think once the worm boots, or if the worm boots are upgradable, which I feel like it's a matter of time until that happens because of just public outcry / demand, that will be another source of haste stuff. So I expect that haste creep stuff to be addressed at the same time that becomes publicly available, because the boots are just really, really strong right now and they're really, really hard to get. Anything else here that's like really interesting? They talk about custom wars. I know that. The release of Eternally added a reaction limiter system to give gold nameplate characters so that after with a stagger, they would have a 2-second window of stagger immunity to give them a opportunity to counterattack. What? Okay. So they're making staggers less annoying for some players. It's different than like the breakout rule that's right now, I imagine. So that's kind of interesting. Fresh start stuff on Season 9, potentially. Or fresh starts merging into standard worlds, and then it's like, will they make new fresh starts or not? That would be a question. Endgame content is getting changed, so they're looking at Umbral V2. I'm guessing this will be Season 10 along with the new perks. Looking at different variants of skill of combat. I mean, I think they've done a really good job with the OPR stuff right now, like the new map and the map rework. I know a lot of people don't like the map rework, but hey, at least it's new. Anything new is refreshing. They've done a 3v3 demo for the third 3v3 map. They've done CTF demos. So like, there's obviously a lot of new PvP stuff coming. I think they've done generally a good job with what they've had, and the question remains if people will come back to the game to explore it. But I'm guessing by the tone of like recent games and how bad and how lackluster the Chrono Odyssey beta looked, that people will explore New World at least at some point when a new expansion comes. Looking at a snow world, I guess, potentially at some point. I don't think any of that really matters, but I think the big thing that they're talking about here is they're looking at a large shift in the perk meta. Wanted to make some life staff adjustments to address some of these issues, because they're talking about sacred ground not stacking. I don't know. So they're looking at some adjustments. There's probably going to be for Season 10. Season 9 will have some stuff. Season 9 will come out in the middle of the New World League. Season N would be near the tail end if we still get there. So that will be one spot where the meta gets mixed up significantly. And I could see if this new Heart Rune comes out at some point during that people will likely try to use it and will likely change the meta, because people won't be able to just strictly dodge out of clumps. As long as people do an attack, they generally be okay. If you run IG, your tomb break should be an attack, so you'd generally be okay if you time your tomb right. But if you're a Great Axe player and you like to double dodge to get to the edge of a clump and then charge out, the double dodge might break and you might be forced to charge, which makes body blocking a lot better. So I think I have an example of body blocking in here, like right after this push. Is it like here-ish? So you see like the heal stuff here and the anti-burst stuff. So they tried to dog me. It doesn't really do anything. We switch back to flail because we're fine. And then like we go for crash, drop shower, like this stuff, like body blocking, like this angle here that results in 2 kills. Like that's stuff that I would expect to be a little bit more prevalent when these changes get rolled out. So I don't know. Those are some thoughts on the current Relentless meta. I generally think this is my favorite artifact in the game, but I'm also a tank player, so I'm biased because it allows you a lot of benefit if you are good at using it. Like, making someone 60% tankier with just one artifact alone is, well, if you run this, like if the tank runs it right, they have minus 25%. So if you give the tank this, they go from minus 25% to plus 35%. So what is that? 25 plus 35, so we got 40 plus 2, so yeah, 60%. So tank gets 60% tankier if they're not running this, and if you run Void Dark Plate on top of that, that's another 20%, which is how I got to that 80% earlier, the difference, because Void Dark Plate was generally the default right now for most tanks, but the wall is also still good in the right hands. So let me know your thoughts on all this, some different shakeups in the meta likely coming. I don't think they're here yet, but there's still some stuff to master at the current meta, and it will be kind of interesting to see how that goes. And I will see you guys later. Peace.